When I was growing up, it seemed unpatriotic not to support democracy. It was not only the system of government, but during the Cold War, it defined us in opposition to communism. My opposition to communism has not ended, but my support for democracy is weakening all the time. Democracy can come in two forms, direct or representative. The Greeks practiced direct democracy. Every freeman could not simply vote, but at some point in his life he would be part of the assembly. He could debate, agree, criticise and vote, and if he voted for war, he got to fight in that war. In a city-state, that was possible. When democracy was revived 2,000 years later, it was as a representative system. Instead of all men being able to make decisions, now only representatives voted. Now that system works as long as there is both genuine representation and if there are genuine differences between the representatives. What has increasingly happened in the West is that the political parties, all the major and most of the minor, are parties of liberalism. There is no genuine representation and no genuine differences between them. They are all liberals, feminists, free traders and multiculturalists. It's a mockery. It's a mockery of the ideals of democracy, and it's a mockery of us. A political system that is a mockery of itself cannot survive because it is losing the one thing that all political systems require: legitimacy. Maybe it is not too late to save democracy, but unless something very radical is done, it cannot survive in its current form. It can only get worse. I've heard from many traditionalists that democracy was always illegitimate as it usurped the authorities of the kings and the church. I hate to say this because it is unpalatable to me to say, as it may be for you to hear, but the reason we are not ruled by kings is because the rule of kings failed. The reign of kings lasted for a long time and was largely successful, but ultimately it failed. The reign of democracy has also lasted for a long time, but it is also failing. Maybe every system of government has its time in the sun and then fades away. Some last century, some for decades, and some for a very short period of time. To be honest, I'm not sure if this is realism or cynicism. Another thing that traditionalists like is a House of Lords, a conservative force made up of ancient families with vested interests in keeping change slow. But a proper House of Lords needs those ancient families, and the truth is that most countries simply do not possess them. Even those countries that do cannot escape the fact that they can be subverted, and in fact have been. So if kings cannot rule, and democracy is failing, and communism is out, what am I proposing? I, like all traditionalists, want the kings to return. I live in a constitutional monarchy, and I would like the monarch to have more power, particularly more power to say no. I would like those countries that once had kings to put them back on their thrones. As for Parliament, I still want to keep Parliament, both houses, but I want the lower house to be representative but not elected. How could this be achieved? By balloting. Each electorate would in effect conscript a man to represent them in Parliament. Only men who are married with children would be able to sit in Parliament. He would be paid his wage at the time of being balloted plus 10%, and that would be indexed to inflation. His pension would also be based upon his income during his tenure, and his term of office would be for 12 years. The 12-year term is important, as it means that they have time to get used to their position, they can learn how the bureaucracy works, and they have an end date beyond which they could not stay. Some will argue that we would get some real idiots and fruitcakes in Parliament, to which I have two comments. Firstly, if you think the current lot of parliamentarians are the cream of the crop, then you really need to pay more attention. Secondly, if a parliamentary system is to survive, it needs real representation and genuine differences. In practical terms, most men would be fine. Some would not be, and there would need to be a way of determining that. But it would need to be based upon real antisocial and or criminal activities and/or mental instability. They would also require more support within their electorate and parliamentary office than are currently allowed. Now, I know this is quite a radical idea, but at the same time, I believe workable. I would like to hear any thoughts you may have on this proposal. One comment that I received was from D for Doom. He said, a couple of other suggestions on democracy. The purpose of Parliament should not be to pass laws. Mostly, we don't need new laws. Changing the law or creating new laws should be seen as a radical change and should require a 2/3 majority of both houses. The other alternative is to require referenda for all major legislative changes. This would not be as difficult as it sounds. They could be held once a year at a particular time, and all legislation requiring a referendum could be done at the same time. The more difficult it is for governments to change things, the better. Actually, I think his suggestions are excellent.